Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Well, hello, friends, and happy Independence Day. I hope that all of you had an opportunity to listen to the show yesterday with my good friend Grant Castleberry, who, of course, is a pastor out of North Carolina, and the discussion about the true purpose of freedom. We celebrated yesterday, and over the weekend, I'm here in Colorado with my family. And, while we always celebrate all of the barbecues, the Rockies games here in Colorado, we always want to remember the true purpose of freedom and liberty and what makes this country great. And one of the things that absolutely makes this country great are our division of powers, our separation of powers. And we have had such an amazing term at the Supreme Court with opinions that have reminded us of the purpose of limited powers of government, but also separating them into the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. So a lot of the questions that I get from listeners, which I'm really happy that all of you write in, if you want to get a hold of me, if you have a question for an episode, if you have a comment or concern, a complaint, as my mom would say, then you can always go to thejennaellisshow.com and click on that button to contact us, and our team reviews those. And often we talk about your questions. And one of the questions that I've gotten most often is, okay, we are seeing the Biden administration utterly fail, but now the Supreme Court has basically been the second Trump term. So where are we headed? And so this last week, my good friend Josh Hammer, who is an opinion editor at Newsweek and also hosts the Newsweek podcast, The Josh Hammer Show, has written a couple of really important articles that discuss this very thing. So who better to have on today than my good friend Josh Hammer? Josh, thanks so much for joining me again.
Jenna, thanks for having me. It's been a pretty powerful 2 weeks, but I hope you had a great Independence Day as well.
Thanks. I hope you did as well. And, let's dive right into your articles. The first one, and we're going to do, by the way, a 2-part episode here because, Josh and I could talk for like 5 hours, but we won't do like a Joe Rogan podcast. It's like 4 hours long. But this is going to be part 1 and part 2. So definitely tune in both, today, of course, you're listening, but then also for tomorrow's episode. But I want to start with the composition of the court and the great Clarence Thomas, because Josh, you wrote such an amazing piece on him, his legacy, and also his majority opinion that you called his magnum opus, essentially. And so talk about the person of Clarence Thomas and why he's so important as a figure to truly lead this court. I'm of the opinion it's more the Clarence Thomas court than it is the Roberts court at this point.
Yeah, look, I'm happy that you said the great Clarence Thomas, Jenna, because he is the great Clarence Thomas. I mean, he is not just one of the greatest Supreme Court justices of all time. I think the only relevant question is whether he's one of the greatest Americans, period, of all time. I mean, he, from my perspective, is the single greatest living American. I'm not even sure who second place would be. I mean, maybe Thomas Sowell or someone like that. But Clarence Thomas, I mean, look, for the listeners, viewers of this podcast who have not done so, really go back to a wonderful documentary that was directed by Michael Pack back in 2020 entitled Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. Michael Pack and Mark Paletta actually have a new book that kind of dovetails with that documentary that just came out last month, I believe, from Regnery Publishing. So just a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous book on Clarence Thomas to kind of go along that documentary. So look, Justice Thomas obviously was confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1991. He was nominated, confirmed by President George H.W. Bush. At that time, as kind of really kind of harrowingly prescient in retrospect, they really threw everything at him. I mean, it was prescient insofar as what they would then do 27 years later with respect to Brett Kavanaugh. But at that time, they kind of, they trotted out Anita Hill with these false fabricated charges of sexual harassment. Clarence Thomas famously referred to it at the time as a quote unquote high tech lynching, kind of looking then Senator Joe Biden from Delaware directly in the eyes. He was then the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee as he said that. And over the course of his now 30 and a half year tenure on the United States Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas has staked out just a remarkably consistent, principled strand of jurisprudence. He is almost assuredly the most intellectually, legally, jurisprudentially consistent jurist on the U.S. Supreme Court, whether you agree or disagree with him. He never pulls any punches. He just says what is the most principled, consistent, originalist thing, full stop, period, end of story. But it is interesting to look over the kind of the arc of Clarence Thomas's career. He oftentimes found himself in dissent more often than in the majority on many impactful, kind of culturally, civilizationally salient decisions. So I'm thinking here of cases, there was a case called Adirond, which is like an affirmative action kind of race conscious case in the 1990s where he kind of just went off. Grutter versus Bollinger, the affirmative action case, obviously Obergefell, the same-sex marriage case. So the upshot, Jenna, is that he hasn't had that many opportunities to write a majority opinion that really kind of fully explicates Clarence Thomas, in his own words, who he is. And I think that moment finally arrived this term. And it's a case that has gotten kind of overshadowed for obvious and really kind of obviously fair and defensible reasons by the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs case. But this is his massive Second Amendment case out of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, where the court, for the first time in its history, the first time, they say that the words keep arms in the Second Amendment, not only do they mean what they mean, that's the DC versus Heller case of 2008 and the McDonald versus Chicago case of 2010, but now we know that to bear arms also means what it means. And then that's basically the holding here. And it's the first time the court has ever said that. It's the first time they've established that the individual right in the Second Amendment extends beyond the home into the public square to carry a firearm. Obviously, states can still have some prudential limitations on that right, but it's the first time they've ever announced this right. It's a 63-page wonderful majority opinion, and I do think that it is his career-defining majority opinion, at least up until right now.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that front and how he expressed this so beautifully in that case. Do you think that there was any sort of rivalry or why? And I've gotten a few questions on this, on why he's the majority opinion in this case and Justice Alito is the majority opinion in the Dobbs case, where Justice Thomas wrote a very powerful concurrence that actually went a little further and talked about the reason for revisiting some of these other cases that, you mentioned Obergefell and going all the way back to Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. And, the standard that the Supreme Court can just look into and literally read between the lines of the Constitution and pull rights out. And so what Thomas was arguing for in his concurrence of Dobbs was absolutely jurisprudentially consistent with the Constitution. But is that possibly the primary reason that he wanted to go further and not write the majority in Dobbs and instead focus on the New York gun case?
That's entirely possible. I'll be honest with you. I have not had that thought. That's entirely possible. I mean, because he obviously did go a little further than the Justice Alito opinion in the Dobbs case. But Alito, I love Justice Alito. I mean, for what my money is worth, he's right out there with Clarence Thomas. I think they're basically interchangeable as my top two favorite justices on the Supreme Court. Sam Alito, he is maybe less of a truly legally intellectually consistent originalist, but he is a real kind of fire-breathing traditionalist, Burkean conservative. In fact, I remember the kind of this old essay that came out around the time I was starting law school back in 2013. I think it actually came out of the now defunct Weekly Standard. You probably can find it from the Washington Examiner archives now, but it was an essay that was kind of a profile on Sam Alito. It was entitled, I think, the Burkean Justice, the most Burkean justice. We're talking here about Edmund Burke, kind of the intellectual godfather of modern conservatism from the late 1700s, kind of the British statesman. And the reason that that's relevant here is because the Dobbs majority opinion, the way that it is written, with this tremendous emphasis on the substantive due process test that the court kind of announced, that specifically then Chief Justice Rehnquist announced in the 1997 case called Washington versus Glucksberg. They basically kind of emphasize whether an unenumerated right is so deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. Well, that rhetoric on history, customs, traditions is it's very Burkean. I mean, it's very kind of intellectually kind of in line with the way that Justice Alito, that Sam Alito kind of thinks about the world and thinks about the law and thinks about our common law heritage, our Anglo-American legal heritage, and all that. So the way that the opinion is written is really just a perfect fit. If you want to do a straight substantive due process Washington versus Glucksberg style historical analysis, that's right up Sam Alito's alley. And then, like to your point, Jenna, that does allow Justice Thomas to kind of come in like a battering ram in concurrence there and just basically say, well, Washington versus Glucksberg aside, this whole doctrine is totally fabricated. We should then, if we're going to be consistent here, we should get rid of. So it was kind of like a 1-2 punch, right? It kind of worked out quite nicely. And yes, to your point as well, it also did kind of free up Justice Thomas probably because, every justice only has 4 law clerks. There's limited manpower. So if you want to produce like a 63-page magisterial opinion in a Second Amendment case, it obviously allowed his clerks then to kind of focus a little more heavily on that. And the Second Amendment, that's a big issue for Justice Thomas. I mean, like he had a wonderful concurrence in the 2010 case, McDonald versus Chicago, which was the previous kind of Second Amendment case the court had decided where they incorporated the DC versus Heller individual right against the states. He had a wonderful 50 to 60 page concurrence in that case, kind of walking us through the 14th Amendment background, talking about the privileges or immunities clause. It was really just a fabulous writing there. Then over the course of the 12 years between McDonald and Bruin, Justice Thomas repeatedly found himself actually dissenting from the court's denial of writs of certiorari in Second Amendment cases. But so what that means to kind of get away from the legalese was he was basically saying to his colleague, this is ridiculous that we're not hearing more Second Amendment cases. The lower courts are going haywire. They're doing all this crazy crap. The Ninth Circuit has this 2-step test that is totally untethered. And it's time for us to kind of take another case and kind of solidify what we meant. So he really, more than any other justice for those 12 years between the McDonald case and the Bruin case, was the most outspoken about the court's failure to take a Second Amendment case. So he argued that they were negligent in doing so, basically. So this is kind of vindication for him on those grounds as well, I think.
Yeah, and that the Second Amendment isn't a second-class right.
Exactly.
That he very famously postured, and I think that's absolutely
Exactly.
correct. And it's also interesting seeing Scalia write this majority opinion after he has started to ask questions from the bench after the death of Justice Scalia. And so, we're seeing this kind of emergence of not only his philosophy that's now being articulated into these really great opinions, but also even more participation openly on the court and almost filling the shoes in a sense of Justice Scalia, but I think even taking it a little bit further. And so in terms of the composition of the court, now that there is a conservative majority, and I say that with a little bit of an asterisk because we've seen a few opinions that haven't really gone with that model. We've also seen some 6-3s that have been great. But now when we're going to be adding a Justice Jackson Brown onto the Supreme Court, how is that, if it will, change the composition? I mean, she's really replacing another liberal justice, but we'll probably go even a little bit further. Do you think that we're going to see an even stronger Scalia that is or Justice Thomas rather, that is going to carry that majority and not even worry about the 3 liberals on the court and just view this as an opportunity now to really reshape and correct a lot of the jurisprudence over the last 15, 60 years that has been wrong?
Yeah, so I don't think the nomination and confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson really changes all that much, right? I mean, like you said, she is replacing Stephen Breyer, who himself was a fairly iconic liberal member of the court for the past 30 years since the Clinton administration. I mean, you can pinpoint maybe a couple of cases, a couple of areas of jurisprudence where Stephen Breyer over the years was a little more pragmatic. I mean, I can think of maybe 2 examples here. So occasionally on kind of Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, law enforcement issues, occasionally Stephen Breyer would side with the court's moderates and conservatives. He tended to be a little less reflexively anti-police, a little less anti-police, less anti-law enforcement, that is, than some of his more liberal colleagues, like the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like Sonia Sotomayor. To be clear, he was not consistent on that. I would say Stephen Breyer was not consistent really on many things. His jurisprudence was kind of by definition inconsistent and kind of a doctrinal mess, but that's really neither here nor there. But every so often on a Fourth Amendment case, you would see him side with the conservatives. So there's a case out of 2013, I want to say, called uh, I think it was called Maryland versus King. Yeah, I think it's Maryland versus King. It was like a cheek swab DNA case. The fact pattern honestly has escaped me. But it was a Fourth Amendment case where Breyer basically sided with the conservatives. Actually, Justice Scalia at that time, if I recall, joined the liberals in dissent. So it was an interesting kind of lineup in that particular case. One other case that I can think of. Because Jen, a couple years ago in 2020, I was privileged to ghostwrite Senator Ted Cruz's last book on the Supreme Court with him. And Ted Cruz, when he was Solicitor General of Texas, actually argued before the court a case called Van Orden versus Perry back in 2005, I believe was the year of that, was with
Yeah.
respect to the Texas State Capitol's 10 Commandments monument there on the Capitol grounds. And, it was an Establishment Clause First Amendment case that got litigated all the way up to the court. And Stephen Breyer actually concurred with the conservatives in that case, too. So again, he was inconsistent on religious liberty. He was inconsistent on kind of Fourth Amendment law enforcement type issues, but at least occasionally he actually would side with the conservatives. You probably won't see that from Ketanji Brown Jackson, but
Mm.
from a broader, higher altitude level view, it's not going to change that much, to be honest with you. And it certainly, I think, is not going to affect the general trajectory of the court, which seems to be more or less heading in the right direction, certainly after this term.
Yeah. So, would you agree with a lot of the commentators that are saying that this is more now of a Justice Thomas led court than Chief Justice Roberts? Because while he's been an incrementalist, he's been a little bit more of a moderate. I mean, he's had some really good opinions and he's had some really good even dissents, like in the Obergefell case. I mean, he was very spot on in his constitutional analysis, regardless of what anyone thinks or our personal views of of gay marriage, which I think is a oxymoron. You can't have that biblically, and there's also all of those definitions and those that whole conversation that we can certainly have. But in terms of just his constitutional analysis, was totally spot on. But he's also been more of the moderate vein, and so is this more of a Clarence Thomas led court now? Where being such a senior member and having this composition, he's really going to start pushing to take cases on the Supreme Court that he can then really flex his originalist views.
I do refer to it as the Thomas Court. I mean, like it is the Roberts Court kind of in name only. I mean, look, the irony of Chief Justice John Roberts, obviously, is that for years and years, in fairly transparent fashion, what he has cared about the most is not necessarily a view of jurisprudence, and he has said this almost openly. Actually, this is kind of the entire point of his intellectually quite sloppy concurrence in the judgment in the Dobbs case. He's basically saying that his view is to go in an incredibly slow, minimalist, incremental fashion because he has this idea that his job as the chief is to preserve the institutional integrity of the court above all else. I was talking with a friend this past weekend, actually, over the holiday weekend, a law professor friend, and I asked him actually if he thought that John Roberts' career trajectory might have been totally different on the court if he were not made Chief Justice. And the law
Mhm.
professor friend said, actually, yes, because becoming the chief does tend to kind of warp your view of the court a little bit. You tend to take more of kind of an institutional view. So if he was just Justice John Roberts, not Chief Justice John Roberts, I think it's at least possible that he might have kind of veered off closer to like a Sam Alito and kind of a more solid conservative vein than a centrist. Obviously, who knows? I mean, like we're just playing kind of alternative history here, but yes, the
Yeah,
fact
this
that
would be a great premise for like a new Netflix show or something like what if and if Clarence Thomas had been the chief instead, how might our jurisprudence look different? That'd be a great premise.
Yeah, no, totally. But look, the fact that John Roberts could not peel away Amy Coney Barrett or Brett Kavanaugh to agree with him on the Dobbs case, I think says all you need to know. The fact that Clarence Thomas got to assign that opinion then to Sam Alito, that he had this powerful concurrence, and that John Roberts had this just totally sloppy, I would say borderline intellectually dishonest, disingenuous concurrence in the judgment in the Dobbs case. The fact that that case played out the way that it did, I think just shows how impotent the chief ultimately is. So this really is Clarence Thomas's court in all but name only right now. And honestly, Jenna, I predict that next term, in kind of the marquee affirmative action cases that are before the court next term out of Harvard and the University of North Carolina, I predict that we're going to see that in action. In fact, the final line of this column that I wrote about Clarence Thomas, I kind of teased that. I said that this Bruin case, the Second Amendment case out of New York State, this is Clarence Thomas's career-defining majority opinion, ... for now. But let's see what happens when
Mhm.
affirmative action, which is a long time, huge bugaboo for Justice Thomas, I predict that he will probably have the majority opinion overturning affirmative action in America a year from now. Again, I could be wrong, but it really is his court right now, I think.
Yeah. And I'm really excited, looking forward to that and seeing also how these justices have not been intimidated by all of the tactics of the intimidation and coming and picketing outside their homes. And, even the alleged assassination attempt of Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, things that are just absolutely fundamentally un American, criminal, and absurd. To see that these justices are not being intimidated by that, they're doing their job, they're fulfilling their oath of office as well. And hopefully that will continue into the next term, which I want to get into in the next podcast episode. So we're going to take a break here and pause for the first episode. Definitely tune in tomorrow because I want to get more with Josh into the substantive cases that we can look forward to and maybe what the posture of the court will be. But before we do that and take a break, Josh, where can people find your column, obviously in Newsweek, but find you, find your show, and all of your great work?
Sure. Thanks, Jenna. So you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Josh_Hammer. My podcast, The Josh Hammer Show, is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, just in general, go ahead and check out newsweek.com/opinion. That's the op-ed page that I run with my 4 deputy editors. So we're having fun, and hopefully we're doing good work over there.
Yeah, and a lot of people who listen to this show, and even when I've posted pieces of yours from Newsweek, a lot of people are saying, "Well, why should we read Newsweek? Isn't that kind of a leftist liberal outlet?" And my response always is, I read everything, and I always read the byline as well because it doesn't matter whether you've published some of my work in Newsweek, and obviously I'm a conservative, but I've also been published in a lot more of the traditional conservative obvious outlets, and even in National Review, which is very never Trumper, back from 2015. And so to me, it doesn't matter as much the outlet, it matters the author. And so for people who are skeptics about Newsweek, what's your pitch to them to read all of the articles and to read the wide swath, but particularly Newsweek?
Sure. I mean, we run right wing content every single day. I mean, I am by my own admission, by my own description, a bit of a right wing nut job. I mean, I'm basically as right wing down the line as they come on any issue that you possibly look at. And I am running the opinion section of Newsweek. I have 4 deputy editors who report to me. They range from the conservative to the liberal, so we are publishing the full spectrum. I am not tasked with publishing exclusively conservative content. We run centrist content and liberal content as well. But we are running hard-hitting conservative op-eds as part of our daily lineup virtually every single day. Not just my weekly
Mhm.
columns, but we have a huge swath of popular commentators, talking heads who are publishing us with Newsweek from a right of center conservative perspective. So go ahead and check it out. I think the listeners might be a little surprised at what they see.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for all of the, leftist and more progressive opinion pieces as well, to me, those are important to read as well because we don't agree with those. And you want to know what are the arguments that people are trying to convince other people of and how can we respond to that. And so this is, of course, the diversity of the public square, and to be able to be intellectually challenged and debate and not just go with what we agree with is incredibly important. And so
Yeah.
I've always really respected the fact that you run op-eds from the entire spectrum because that's actually what makes a publication really great. So definitely check out Josh's work. But anything that is by his byline, you can be pretty certain is going to come from a conservative perspective. But definitely always check out the byline, not just the outlet. Read everything that Josh writes, and even if you don't agree with it, it's still obviously educational. It's informative, and read all of these things. Like I said, I read the entire spectrum of everything from the most right wing outlet to Huffington Post and all of those other ones over there, even Salon, because I want to know what everybody is saying, and then that also will inform my perspective and position. And we need to also be able to give a response. And as the Bible says, always be able to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. That's not just theology, it's not just doctrine. It also means the cultural and political issues as well, because we have to be engaged civil servants as well as just good citizens and engage in civil society. So we're going to pause here, but make sure that you tune in tomorrow for part 2 with my good friend Josh Hammer. We're gonna still be talking about the future of the Supreme Court. So I'll see you tomorrow. Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. I also want to talk about another great American who is the sponsor of this podcast, and that, of course, is my good friend Mike Lindell. He has been canceled out of so many box stores for simply standing up for his own political opinion. And disagree or not, or support him or not, it is a fundamental right of every American to be able to voice their opinion, and that absolutely includes politics. That absolutely includes issues that are central to our culture. That includes faith. Mike is such a very sincere Christian, and I am proud to consider him a friend, and he is, of course, a friend of this show. So right now, there is a special on MyPillow.com. Click on the new radio listener specials. Get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including a great towel set, which is a 6-piece set. It includes 2 bath, 2 hand towels, 2 washcloths, made in the USA, regularly $109.99, now just $39.99, but you have to use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. That tells Mike that you listen to this show, you're happy that he is a sponsor of this show, and you will get great discounts, but use the promo code Jenna, that's Jenna, either at mypillow.com or call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna.